Welcome to My Life, Tanya Applied, with Rabbi Simon Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
A good week. We continue our journey in the life-changing Sefer Tanya. This program is made possible by Rena Lights LLC and is an honor and memory of Rav Yosef Halevi Weinberg Olav Hashalom, Rav Moshe Pinchas HaKoyen Katz Olav Hashalom, Rav Yoel HaKoyen Khan Olav Hashalom, and since chus and merit of Rav Zev Yecheskel HaKoyen and Risha Katz La'edich Yomim V'Shanim Tevis for many long, healthy years. So we're in the middle of chapter 13, actually coming to the conclusion of the Perek. And we've entered a very critical piece now, which is an answer to questions that every one of us asks. And that is the challenge of how genuine, how authentic is our work. You know, when you read and learn about tzaddikim, Moshe Rabbeinu, the Oves, the patriarchs, the matriarchs, other great men and women throughout history, and you compare yourself, you say, you know, my work, I know it's not even comparable. Mi ani mani, what am I? We may call ourselves hypocrites, definitely not reaching those levels. So is our work real? I remember the first time I heard a really profound shir in Gemara. I remember learning Masechta Kedushin. And I saw that there were people who harving their whole life to learn a sugi in Gemara. And we were Bachrim in Yeshiva struggling to understand the Rashi, Atesvus. I remember asking myself and asking my Rosh Yeshiva, as much as we're going to achieve, it doesn't come close to what they achieved. So I understand Hashem values everyone's work, and from a point of view of the Gavra, we say, B'chol moedecha, moed shalcha. Every day, V'haftas Hashem l'kecha, b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshcha, b'chol meidach, with all your might. And you have to give it your all. Famous story with Rab Zusha, who was once sitting in a corner crying. And someone asked him, why are you crying? He says, I'm not crying because they're going to ask me why I wasn't like the Baal Shem Tov, or why I wasn't like the Maggid of Mizrich, or why I wasn't like this God. I'm crying because they're going to ask me why I wasn't like Zusha. In other words, from each of us is requested what we need to do. But still, when you think about it, how could you compare? Emes lamite, true Aveda. You see a tzaddik, you see a rebbe. So after everything we've been learning, and I've pointed this out many times, because this is a question I keep receiving again and again. When you learn Tanya, the standards are so high. Even if you're completely in control of your thoughts, speech, and action, all the time, and you're learning Torah all day. Not only Torah, but Torah with passion. Like as if a person is davening all day, as we learned. Still, that doesn't mean you're a tzaddik. Because the etzem mohus, your essential animal soul, is still active. And that's why Rabbi considered himself like a Beni. Though he wasn't, but he was Mekayim. Even the Kol Elam Kulei, the whole world tells you you're a tzaddik. You should look at yourself like Kedosha, like a Benini. So it could be very depressing, very demoralizing. With all that, I mean, the challenge to be able to, in a place that a person lay over Aveda miyom v'lo yaver, never did an Aveda, never will do one, we discussed. But the standard is so high. You can come away saying, so whatever I do, what is it? It's crumbs. It's nothing. Comes the Alter Rebbe and says the exact opposite. It's true, we need to know what the highest standard is. But that's not coming to diminish or in any way minimize the emes of your Aved and where you are. So how do you reconcile the two? It's either emes or it's not emes. It's emes a sheket. So it's one of the commentaries on Tanya from Rabbi Yaakov Kadainer, a chassid of the Mittler Rebbe. Very powerful commentary, very practical in many ways. So he asks exactly this question in chapter 13 here in Tanya. Emes and sheket. It's a black and white thing. It's either true or it's not true. There's no such thing as a half-truth. As the Alter Rebbe himself said. Either it's real, completely real, like we learned last week, where he speaks about Avish, he says from the Pasuk, Sfas Emes Tikkun La'ad V'adargia Loshen Sheket. emes means it's always true. And that's why by Beinani, whose ava is a real ava while he's davening, but afterwards it can subside. Therefore, even when it's there, it's considered, like he says, at all true. So it's black and white. It seems to be an absolute. And yet, no, that's not the case. There's an element of absolute taka emes lamita. We have to know how great we can become. We have to know what the highest levels are. But we also have to know where we stand. So it's important to establish that they're truly high standards. So if the marathon, to give an example, is a 25-mile marathon. If you haven't ran the 25 miles, you haven't run the marathon. But that's also at the same time not going to take away from the emes of you running even a mile. And that's what we're going to learn now, the second half of the story. As he explains, Yaakov Kadana explains, that like light and darkness. You could think these are two absolutes. It's light and dark, but it's not correct. We know, for example, when the sun sets, it doesn't get dark over in a minute. It takes time till the sun sets, and there's dusk, bein hashmoshes, seisek harchavim. Same thing, you could have a very bright day, then you could have a cloudy day. You can be in your house and the light is not that strong. The point being that the emes of Elikus, the truth of Elikus, is so real that though, yes, there's the highest standard of emes lamite, which means absolutely no room for anything but godliness, but the truth of God is true even in areas where something may not be completely aligned with godliness. There's also nekudas emes there. So it's the exact opposite, the conclusion. And we'll learn this insight momentarily. What's the exact opposite? We would think that either it's completely true or it's completely outside of the realm of godliness. The exact opposite. Since the Eibush is true in Eined Milvade, is true in every possible way, so even in a dark world, even a world where there's sheker and there's falsity, the Kudas Emes of the Eibush is also there. So when you connect to that, even momentarily, there's an emes in your work. So it's not just the Eibush values everyone's effort. There's an emes everywhere. So it's actually because of the absolute truth of the Eibishter that tells us that emes is everywhere, also in the Beinani. Even though, when you talk about emes in the fullest sense of the word, it's absolute. So we have to wrap our head around it, because you think if something is absolute, then where's there room for partial? But the point is not partial, it's because God is real. And the sheker, and that which is not permeated with truth, is not there yet. But ultimately, the essence of everything is godliness. If we were to say that this world is fundamentally a world of sheker, even though we call it alma de shikra, a false world, and that's its etzem, then you could say, okay, either you have truth or you don't. But if the etzem of everything, just like he said before, the mehusa v'atzmusa, is really godliness in everything, means emes in everything, so you can find emes even on a level that's not the tzaddik. Though the tzaddik clearly is in the full context of someone that is 24/7 and the fullest way what we call the emes. So there's the two sides. So really what's coming out from the end of the chapter 13 is to teach us that we all have access to the divine truth. But you have to access it. You have to reach into it. Your nefesh elikis is your true you. The Rambam Paskins in Sof Hilchos in the Sof Perek Beis, second end of the second chapter, Hilchos Gedushin, where he talks about Keifanese Acha Emeretzani, that you compel him till he says, I want to give a get. He says, but what does that mean? If you're forcing him, then it's not really he really wants. You're forcing him to want. So he says, no, you know who's forcing him? It's his Yetzer Hara. Yitzrei hu sha'anseh. Because of why? Because a Jew be'etzem wants to do mitzvahs and wants to stay away from avedas. That's his etzem. It's the Yetzer Hara that is the superimposed force that distracts and draws us away from our etzem. So that's why when you compel him to say Reitzani, it's really what he really wants. He just has an outside obstacle that's not letting him get there. It's like a person says, I b'shum don't want to eat. The natural person wants to eat because eating is necessary for life. Someone says, I don't want to eat. And I don't mean for a fast day or for a short time. So you know there's something wrong. So sometimes you have to force him to eat because he really wants. It's just some mishagas, something that's an obstacle, some impediment that's causing him not to want to or not to feel that he wants to. Okay, so with that, now we're going to go to the other side. But let's review again. So he starts this last section in Perek Yud Gimel. V'hinemidas avazu, the one we're talking about, the ava by the Beinoni. So on one hand, we have to be a true introspection, as we discussed in the last class. Means being honest and understanding that this midas ava b'shas tefillah, which comes through alidei his gabrus hanefesh alikis, that comes through the dominance and the overpowering of the divine soul during davening. Shasat tefillah, which comes out is garbus hanefesh alikis. Hine legabe madreges hatzadikim. An honest appraisal is to tell you that compared to the level of tzadikim, Evdei Hashem be'emes la'amitei, who worship God with absolute authenticity because it's constant and there's no pause altogether, so that's the sign of absolute truth. Ein b'chinas avazu nikraz b'shem avedas emes klal. This type of love of the Beinoni cannot be classified as genuine worship at all. Since it dissipates and goes away after davening, after prayer. So that's one hand. We have to know what the standard is. So to say there's emes in everything, absolutely true, as we're going to discuss. But the goal is that we should radiate, the world should be permeated, eined milvade. Think of a human body. A healthy human body means it's healthy from head to toe in every aspect. If one part is not healthy, you can't call it health. But at the same time, that doesn't mean the part that the part that is healthy is completely not healthy either. The other side of the coin, as we're going to now continue. Nevertheless, v'afal pikein, comes out the Rebbe now continues. V'afal pikein, I should have brought the pasuk. V'ksiv sfas emes tikein la'ad v'ad argio loshen shaker. That means anything that is that emes is something that lasts forever. Truthful lips endure forever, but a lying tongue lasts only a moment. And now comes the other side. Now that we've established that that's the ultimate standard, emes lamite, afal pikein, nevertheless, legabe madreges habeinanim, with regard and in relation to the level of the beinanim themselves and what they're capable of achieving, what they're capable of, nikras aveda tama, be'emes lamite shalahem. So he's using the same word, emes lamite shalahem, that this can be classified as aveda tama, complete or ideal worship. Aveda tama is an expression from the Gemara. Let me give you the Gemara Mokim for it. In Yuma Chavdal Amar Aleph 4024a. That's an Aveda Tama, meaning it's the complete Aveda Tama. It's like the conclusion of the Aveda. It's not like there's more to do. She'en acharei Aveda acheres. She Aveda, the Rashi says there, the Gemara and Rashi says in Yuma, Aveda she gemeres umitamemes es hadover. It completes. So it's a complete Aveda. And the words are, Be'emes lamitas shalahem. Be'emes lamite shalahem. Be'emes lamite shalahem of the Beinoni. Absolutely authentic for them. So here you have, 1 second. He's saying, before he said that tzaddikim is Evdei Hashem be'emes lamite. And the Aveda of the Beinoni compared to that, in Ein Bechinas Avazu Nikra B'Shem Aveda Emes Klal. Here he's saying it's Emes Lamite in their level. How do you explain that? Because the point is, because godliness is everywhere. So even when a Beinoni does something, and even if it's only during davening and afterwards the love will dissipate, But during that moment, it's not fake. And that's the answer to the big question, even if you're not on the highest level. And compared to others, you could say it's not real emes, like he said. But in your level, and what you should be doing, there's emes. The emes of godliness is there. We're going to learn more, the reason behind it. But that's the statement that he's making. So in the same breath, emes lamite, the Alter Rebbe could have said, emes legabe. He could have said, nikras aved tama, be'emes shalahem, be'emes lamite shalahem. But that's what he's saying. Each individual relative to his level among the different levels of Beinanim. Because this isn't a contest or a competition. Each person has in their level has to find the emes where they're up to. To ask a Beini to be a tzaddik, which means completely eliminating their Yetzer Hara, it's not possible. It's not how we were born. I mean, there are ways that it can happen. The Eibishter can bless us with that, as we're going to learn later in Tanya, with an neshama of a tzaddik. So what can be asked is to fight the animal soul to the point that you don't allow it to have any effect on your thought, speech, and action. And that's emes lamite for the Beinani. At the same time, the Beinani should not delude themselves that they're a tzaddik. And that's not a contradiction. It's not meant to demoralize. It's meant to put things where they are, emes. To know the truth of everything. But the key emphasis now is that emes lamite shalahem. Each one according to his level. So the first point is because there's an emes in what you do, even if it's that moment. You know, people sometimes ask the question, what's the big thing a person does a mitzvah? And a second later, they don't do mitzvahs. There was a big question about mitzvah tefillin when the Rebbe came out with the campaign for tefillin. You're putting on tefillin on somebody who we know before and after may be behaving in a life and living a life that's antithetical to tefillin. So what do you accomplish? So besides the fact that it says mitzvah gereres mitzvah, that a mitzvah leads to another mitzvah, which also needs explanation. Why? Who says? So the answer is because this is an id. And like I mentioned the Rambam, he has emes of his neshama is there. He just, for whatever reason, is not aware of it. He's not living up to it. So when you're putting on tefillin, you're not doing something superimposed that's unnatural. That is who he is. By a tzaddik, or let's put a person by a tzaddik, he is conscious and permeated and completely saturated with that awareness. This person is not aware. But it doesn't mean that the pilot flame is alive and kicking inside. Ani yashen v'li be'er. I may be asleep, but my heart is awake. And afal pishachata Yisrael. He's always a Yisrael. So when you're putting on tefillin, you're not doing something unnatural. He's just not conscious of why it's natural to him. What you're doing is touching that core essence that's actually deeper than the rest of him. That's living a life that is antithetical to tefillin and to mitzvahs. And that's indeed the reason why mitzvah gereres mitzvah, because a mitzvah has within it all other mitzvahs. It's all about Hashem's truth. And this person is a id who's connected to Hashem, whether he knows it or not, is conscious of it or not. So when you're doing one mitzvah, you're igniting that pilot flame that's already in there. And it's emes lamite in his level. Now, if we were to say it's not part of who he is, God forbid, so then, it's like, God forbid, it's like putting tefillin on a monkey. That has no value. Chassidus brings the example, putting tefillin on a table. Doesn't accomplish anything, but you're not talking about a table. You're talking about a neshama. A neshama that's in golus in his body and in the guf and nefesh habamis and in this golus that we live in. But what you're doing is touching the emes of it. So by a tzaddik, emes lamite means, like I said, 24/7, completely saturated. That will be the case also when Mashiach comes. To the point, even Mekir Tizak, that the stone of the wall is going to cry out, Elikus, godliness. So, however, because of that, so when a person does one mitzvah, and here he's talking obviously much more than one mitzvah, we're talking about a Beinani here. I'm just giving an example, Kol Shkem V'Kal V'Chemer, a Beinani. when he does have this ava, it's emes lamite shalahem. Each person in his level. It's the godliness that he's accessing right now. And then, of course, from there he can grow. But the Alter Rebbe, even more than that, is going to explain further. That is a basic point that we just said. But the fact of the matter is, we said before, the Pasuk Sfas Emes Tiken La'ad, right? We said that Pasuk, which meant that truthful lips endure forever. And based on that, we said, since by a Beinani, his Ava is not forever because it only lasts during davening. So how do we address that? So Alter Rebbe goes further. V'hareini keire ba'avosam, shabitfilosam, gam kein sfas emes tikkun la'ad. And I also consider their love, the love of the Beinani, which is through shabitfilosam, when they daven, also consider that truthful lips endure forever. You said just few lines before that it dissipates. So he says, Hoyil, in addition to what we explained, because that moment, that's the emes of Elikus, and emes Elikus he has touched. Even if nothing changes, even if it dissipates, he says, but furthermore, Hoyil u'b'koyach nafshem Elikis lachzer, u'le'erer, b'chinas avazula elam. But since there's a divine soul there, and that divine soul has the ability, b'keich nafshem alikis, to repeatedly, lachzer u'le'erer, to repeatedly arouse this love, always, le'elam. How? Bizgabrusa b'shasat tefillah midi yem b'yem, when the divine soul gains dominance and overpowers the animal soul every day during tefillah. So it's not just a one-day thing. Every day he could do this. So in addition to what he actually does, he has the power constantly, la'elam, to always do this. Every day, we learned earlier even, have alavai she'ispal od b'chol yom kulei, and it shall last even the entire day. Whether he does it or not is another question. Rabbah did it. But he has the power because the nefesh alakis is there. Al yidei hachana haruya, through preparing properly, l'chol nefesh kvi erko madregosa, each individual according to his soul's type and level. Again, he's bringing the relative element. Each person has that power. So as a result of that, that's why you call it emes lamite. So now this is an additional point. Hypothetically, even the nefesh alikis only had a one-time experience of such love, that would also be called emes lamite because the emes of God, as we discussed. But the Alter Rebbe goes further. Because it's a nefesh alikis, it's not, and it's its natural state, it always has that power. Because that's what it is. Whether he's acting on it all the time or not, that's another question. But he always has that capacity. It's not a superimposed force. Especially by a Beinani. Because we see a Beinani has that ability to come to that point. Now, obviously, even though he doesn't say it explicitly, you could say, so what happens after davening? We still spoke about that the Beinani has moyach shal ta'alev, has other resources at his availability. But Alter Rebbe is not bringing that here because he's bringing something far stronger. He's bringing by the nefesh alikis' love. He wants to show that the love that he had during davening is emes lamite. We're not just talking about the self-control of the Beinani, which is also part of the equation. So this drives the point home. So it's not just like when you say a person does a mitzvah once. So you say that mitzvah is touching his esam and neshama. He's saying furthermore, no, the nefesh alikis is active and always has the capacity to awaken that love every day during davening. And that's what makes it so there we see now why you can call why we can call it tikkun la'ad. Because you could say, fine, There's an emes of godliness in him. But how could you say forever? Tikkun la'ad means permanently. How could you say that? So, on one level, you can answer that based on what I said earlier. It's forever because the godliness is forever, even though he's experiencing it on a one-time basis. But it's going much deeper than that and much further than that. It's forever. It endures forever because every moment he has that power, la'elam, to awaken that. That's a forever thing. So what's the difference between that and a tzaddik? The tzaddik actually does it and is actually on that level all the time. And the Beni has the capacity and actualizes even daily by davening, or even if it's more often. So you have both sides of the story here. Again, the same two sides like we learned earlier in the Pedic. That on one hand, a Beinoni has total control of the garments, thought, speech, and action, just like a tzaddik. On the other hand, the Beinoni is not a tzaddik because his faculties of the animal soul are still active. So he has to realize that emes lamite of a tzaddik is not. But he's an emes lamite on his level he is, due to the godliness within him, the nefesh halakish, which is a chelik halakha memal mamish. So I said this is a tremendous yisod in Aveda to understand and uplifting and empowering what we're capable of, while also at the same time recognizing there are people that are great, there's tzaddikim. But no one's asking you to be the tzaddik. You have to know that standard. And you can even aspire to it. That our actions, our behavior should be like the actions of the patriarchs. But even as we stand here and we do our Aveda on our level, each person according to their level is reaching an emes lamite of the nefesh halakis. Now the Alter Rebbe is going to continue now to further explain this idea, what emes is. He's going to explain it with midas emes, mitosis shel Yaakov, to understand what truth is. Because again, on one hand, truth seems to be uncompromising. Total. Aleph, Mem, Sof, no matter what circumstance, emes. But there's another part to emes, that emes is everywhere. Because the truth of existence is the emes Hashem Le'elam, God's truth. And we have to understand that balance is going to continue to explain in the next section, which leads us to the end of the chapter. So, we'll stop here. This has been Tanya Applied. Go to tanyaapplied.com for this program and all previous programs, as well as a place you can submit your questions, a forum. Everyone have a very good tavoch.
This has been My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please join us again next week. Visit chasidusapplied.com for archived classes and more resources.